welcome you to the Dr. Warren Gage podcast, and today I want to look at, continue our study in Job, and I want to look at Job's protest in chapter 9, where he asks for a mediator. And I think that's anticipatory for Christ himself. There is one mediator between God and man, and that is Christ Jesus, who is both God and man. He's going to long for someone to come in between, who can understand both and lay his hands on both of us, that is God and man. And so what he's longing for is ultimately what Christ will provide. So these are marvelous. Chapters 9 and 10. I'm not planning on looking at everything. I'm really not that concerned with his so-called comforters, his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, that come to comfort him. Eliphaz has already spoken, and Bildad. I will, by way of introduction to chapter 9, which I'm more focusing on how Job responds, is I'll read the first part of what Bildad has to say, and then I want to make some comments on it, because they're all arguing that Job is suffering superlatively because he must have been extraordinary in his sinning. And so that simple equation, that suffering is the consequence of sin, confounds Job's experience, and I think largely speaks to the message of the book. So in chapter 8, Bildad, the Shuhite, answered and said, "How long will you speak these things, and the words of your mouth be like strong wind? Does God subvert just judgment?" And the answer to that, obviously, is no. But the truth of the matter is that within the horizons of what we know and can see, and within the perimeter of our sight itself, the answer to that is not solvable. We cannot give a theodicy, we cannot give a justification based on what we are able to see in this life. That's a pretty strong statement, but I think that's really true. Or does the Almighty pervert justice? Of course not. But can we demonstrate that? And I'm not so sure that we can. But we'll see as we go through this. If your sons have sinned against him, he has cast them away for their transgression. So what a comfort that is to Job, that his children died because of their sin. If you would earnestly seek God and make your supplication to the Almighty, if you were pure and upright, surely now he would awake for you and prosper your rightful habitation. Though your beginning was small, yet your latter end would increase abundantly. So he's trying to encourage him to repent of this secret sin for which God has justly brought upon him these calamities, and with the promise held out that there would be glory that would follow the suffering, which is also true. That is a true biblical principle. So I've given some thought to this. I wanted to reflect on it, and I think that this will get as far as we can, I think, to the answer of the book. I don't know that there's a final answer, except that he is pleased by our faith, and faith is to believe in God, even contrary to our circumstances. It seems to be that that's the case. So the idea is of these so-called comforters of Bildad is that God is just, and because you have been punished greatly, you must be greatly guilty. The challenge of the book is that we know, although Job does not apparently know, we know from the opening scene in heaven that there is a contest that's going on, and Job doesn't seem to have any awareness of that. He has to live in the world that Bildad is describing, and he's struggling to come to terms with the fact that that doesn't add up. So we know that what Bildad has said is not true, because we know that Job is innocent. God himself spoke about his integrity. Job says he knows he is innocent. And therefore the question is, why am I suffering? Because he knows that God is just. That's not really the issue. Why is there suffering that is not justified by sin? And I think that that's the dilemma of life. We are all unjust because of the doctrine of original sin. That is the idea that in Adam we all died. We sinned, and all of our first parents' offspring are born as sinners. The evidence of that is the first gesture they make after their sin is to cover their nakedness, which are their generative members, through whom they recognize immediately that they've brought death and shame upon their seed. And so there is a biblical doctrine of original sin. It seems to me that's very clear. We are born in sin, as David said, "In sin did my mother conceive me." But then we have that nature, and when we are confronted with circumstances that call for moral integrity, we sin ourselves, so we ratify the choice of our first parents. So we are doubly condemned for our injustice, it seems to me. We are unjust because of original sin, and we have to remember that God is just. Now, how do we reconcile that? We know a little bit more about the history of redemption. The lament of so many unbelievers is that I didn't sin in the garden. I wasn't there. It wasn't me that partook of the fruit of disobedience. And so I should not have any consequence that comes to me from that garden. But then there was another garden, and that was the garden near the cross. And the reality is I wasn't on Calvary either. And by the same principle that my guilt and sin was imputed to me from the first Adam, by that same principle that we find so difficult to understand, our guilt, my guilt, was imputed to Christ on the cross, and he's the one who suffered the penalty, the wrath of God, that was justly deserving not to his sin, but to my sin. So if I don't want to acknowledge a connection in sin to my first parents, then I really have no right to claim the benefit of Christ's suffering and justice on my behalf. Seems to me that that's all one piece. The question of Job is, why does the innocent suffer? And God promises glory on the other side of suffering. That's axiomatic to the apostles in the New Testament. If we suffer with him, we will reign with him. That's promised certainly in heaven. The sufferings of this present age are not worthy to be compared with the glory that will come. But the only way we can understand justice in this world is to recognize that God has different horizons than we do. We wouldn't know about the contest between Satan and God in heaven over the question of Job's righteousness. Job didn't know that, we do. And so we're encouraged to expand the horizons of our understanding beyond the perimeter of that which we can see, and recognize that things are being worked out on a cosmic level that make sense of things ultimately, but are not given to us to understand. And so we live life as a conundrum. We cannot expect to be able to explain everything. Even Moses spoke in Deuteronomy of the things that God has revealed to mankind, but there are things that are not revealed. And so those we have to bow before what our Creator has enabled us to understand and revealed. I think this comes down to the dilemma that Paul addresses in Romans chapter 9, and I wanted to look at that because we're talking about God's justice. And this passage disturbs many because it raises the question very graphically that we're dealing with, but it doesn't offer the kind of answer that I think that most of us would expect. Now, the context of Romans 9:18 is the commission that Moses had to go to Pharaoh and to command him to let God's people go. When God gave that commission to Moses on Sinai, God also spoke further and said, "Tell him to let my people go." And then God said, "But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go." In other words, it raises the question of the freedom of the will. How free is our will? There are determinists now. The scientific community, for the most part, is deterministic. Everything is predestined. If they understand the programming that we have, the environmental programming, the genetic programming that we have, the chemical programming that we have, there really is no freedom of the will. And that is an issue because it's so fixed in our own thinking, and that then is the easy equation, leads to the easy equation that we suffer because we have sinned. But Pharaoh sins without his will being free, because God said, "I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go." And the purpose of God in doing that, in Exodus 9, I believe we're told, God hardened his heart in order that he might show his power in Egypt in the polemic that he leads through the plagues against the gods of Egypt to deliver the people from their idolatry. So God's purposes were far more than just the individual intentions of Pharaoh, although they too were ungodly. So Paul concludes after talking about that. He says, I'll begin in 17. "For the scripture says to Pharaoh, even for this same purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth." That's Exodus 9:16. And Paul continues and says, "Therefore he has mercy on whom he wills, and whom he wills he hardens." So how do we understand that? God is clearly sovereign. The same sun that softens the wax will harden the clay. And so here we have God being the effective agent. So Paul then, in dialectic format, anticipates the objection of the interlocutor, and he says, "You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? How can he assess blame? For who can resist his will, or who has resisted his will? Who could resist his will?" The answer to that is no one can resist his will. So why then would he blame Pharaoh? And then he says, "Nay, but O man, he says, remember who you are, a creature. Like the tragedian said, a creature of a day. You have no time and no depth in this world to speak of. Nay, but, O man, who are you to reply against God? Will the thing formed say to him who formed it, why have you made me like this?" We are creatures. This is the image of the potter and the wheel. And the potter does not ask the clay how to make the vessel that he intends. And the vessel has no right in and of himself to ask, why did you make me in this particular fashion and intend me for what specific purpose he has been created? Does not the potter have power over the clay from the same lump to make one vessel for honor and another for dishonor? That does not seem just to us when we apply it to humanity, but that's exactly what God is saying here, through Paul, that it's not a question of justice for us, because we cannot summon God to our bar of justice to give an answer. What if God, wanting to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction. My goodness, this is very strong. And that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he had prepared beforehand for glory. So, I think this is directly relevant to our study of Job, because Job was clearly a vessel intended for glory. He has tremendous faith, but he is useful to God to make a demonstration to the heavenly court about the righteousness that he has given to Job, and he is not subject to our understanding of justice, or to Job's understanding of justice more directly. Now, to those kinds of comforters, Job replies in chapters 9 and 10, and I want to look at them in some detail. I'm focusing on Job because God says at the end that Job spoke about him truly. And so I think we can have confidence that we're learning from this very righteous and very good man. Then Job answered and said, now, not perfectly, he too must confess his sin, which he does, but insofar as he speaks truly, we can learn from him, certainly. So Job says, truly I know it is so, but how can a man be righteous before God? And I think there's a humility that's being expressed there that's correct. If one wished to contend with him, he could not answer him. If you wanted to charge God with injustice, you couldn't answer, because you don't understand what justice is apart from what God reveals. How would we know what is good and evil unless he had given us a tree and a commandment that was intended for good and to protect us from evil, but we disobeyed? He could not answer him one time out of 1,000. Now, I'm reading from the New King James, which I think is about the best English translation. But here I have to differ with them. I think when Job is alleged to say he could not answer him one time out of 1,000, that leaves open to me the possibility that there might be a time, although it's unlikely, but there might be a time when God could be answered, when man could offer an answer. And I think what I would prefer to translate this, and based on the Hebrew text, I would render it, if one wished to contend with him, he could not answer him even one time out of 1,000. I think that captures the sense of it more. Job knows that there is no answer that a human could pose, that he could not find injustice with God. He knows that. But he can't understand what he is suffering, because he would think that that would be the consequence of injustice. And apart from original sin, there is really no answer. He's suffering in order to shame the adversary, the enemy of mankind, but he doesn't fully understand that. God is wise in heart and mighty in strength, who has hardened himself against him and prospered. Job says you can't do that. You can't make that kind of an answer. God removes the mountains, and they do not know when he overturns them in his anger. There's tectonic upheaval, there's volcanic eruption, there are all kinds of mighty things, mighty in energy that we see in this world, and God is the one who does that. He shakes the earth out of its place, and its pillars tremble. He used the metaphor of a house. The very foundations of the earth shake. So he commands the sun, and it does not rise. He seals off the stars. He alone spreads out the heavens. Whether he knows it by specific revelation or general, I don't know, but God can cause the sun to go through the course of the day, rising in the east and setting in the west. He can turn the sun back, as he does in the days of Hezekiah. He can turn the sun back 15 degrees in its dial, and he can also cause the sun to stop, like he does at the valley of Ajalon with Joshua against the kings of Canaan. So God controls the sequence of time. He can run it forward, run it backwards, or stop it altogether. Who can stand against him? How does he do that? We have not even a beginning of an understanding of how that's possible. That violates every law that we know of the way that physics should work. If the earth were to stop, everything would fly apart. So God is the one who not only stops the sun in its course, but then he keeps everything together. He alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. Now, the waves is a rendering. The word literally is high places, and sometimes people think that means clouds. I think this is probably right, but he treads, he makes a path on the waves of the sea. This is God himself. But when Christ comes, we will see that this is exactly what Christ does when he walks on the sea in the storm. Marvelous language, and Christ will incarnate these truths, but he will incarnate it not as the suffering of Job, but also as the divine God of whom Job spoke. He made the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades, the seven sisters. These are the constellations. He put them in their courses. I think that's right, because it's talking about the sun and in its course and all of that, spreading out the heavens and the stars. This makes sense to me. He's looking at God and what wisdom is there to put all of these things in place. And the chambers of the south, the chambers that from which the rain will come. He does great things past finding out. Yes, wonders without number. Beyond number is literally what it says. He does great things past finding out, past the boundaries of reason. And he does wonders that can't be counted. If he goes by me, I do not see him. If he moves past, I do not perceive him. If he takes away, who can hinder him? Who can say to him, what are you doing? And that anticipates Paul. Why are you making me like this? What are you doing? Who can ask that other than simple inquiry? You certainly can't intend that in the sense of what are you doing, like you're calling upon him to justify his ways. God will not withdraw his anger. The allies of Rahab lie prostrate. This is Rahab, the twisting serpent, the chaos creature. So he's talking about the chaos creature that dwells in the river or in the sea beneath him. How then can I answer him? And the I is emphatic in Hebrew. How is it that I could answer him? If he does all of these things in the heavens above and in the seas below, how could I possibly give an answer to him and choose my words to reason with him? For though I were righteous, I could not answer him. Though I were righteous, I could not answer him. So there seems to be an implicit understanding there that he knows he has no answer, and he desperately wants one, and that's the conundrum in which he finds himself. I would beg mercy of my judge. If I called and he answered me, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice. For he crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. Fascinating. Why would he say without cause, without a cause that's revealed? He will not allow me to catch my breath, but fills me with bitterness. What is bitterness? Bitterness comes when anger leaves and there has been no vindication. He's saying that God is the one who's causing all of that. If it is a matter of strength, indeed, he is strong. If of justice, who will appoint my day? If it's a question of justice, how will I get a day in court? There is no tribunal that will hear his complaint. Though I were righteous, my own mouth would condemn me. Though I were blameless, it would prove me perverse. I think this is the dilemma. All of us know we're guilty. And when we see people being taken off to judgment, in this country, perhaps handcuffed and carried away. In Russia, it's interesting. One of the customs in Russia, and Dostoevsky talks about this, that when they would exile their prisoners to Siberia, and they would, on occasion, groups of prisoners would be conducted along the way. They would walk to Siberia, and coming out from the village would be the people who would look at them, but they did not look at them in contempt. They looked at them as they are the ones that are suffering for us. It's almost a substitutional idea that they must suffer for us. In fact, the gospel women, they were called. Women would go out to the prisoners and give them copies of the gospel. One of those gospel women gave a copy of the New Testament to Dostoevsky, and that's how he came to faith. So they did not look at them with contempt. They looked at them as the ones who had been convicted, but they understood, I think very profoundly, that we all deserve punishment. There is none of us that doesn't mean that we are righteous and they are guilty. It means that they have somehow been caught, and they are the ones that are guilty, and we are all of us guilty. So anyway, who would appoint my day? My own mouth would condemn me. He says, I am blameless, yet I do not know myself. What an honest confession is that. I despise my life. It is all one thing. Therefore I say, he destroys the blameless and the wicked. He destroys the blameless and the wicked. Job, I think, understands. He certainly knows that God has his answers and he has his purposes, and that he has no claim on God, nor can he charge God with sin. He can't, or with injustice. But his circumstances and the part that he knows would lead him to that conclusion. And he wants to resist it, I think. He would love to be able to make sense of things. But he is shut up, actually, in the only refuge he has. And the only refuge at certain times that we have, too, is faith. That is, believing God when facts are contrary to belief. We believe in any case, in any way. So, if the scourge slays suddenly, he laughs at the plight of the innocent. This is, I think he knows this isn't right, but it seems to be the case. He mocks at the plight of the innocent. Now, we know with greater revelation, God is not insensitive to these things. The word mocking here is used in Psalm 22 of Christ himself. They mock Christ. So God knows this feeling of being mocked at, and he was the truly innocent one who was suffering. And they're mocking him because they think he's a great sinner. And they're blaspheming him, and they're hanging him upon a tree so that they will invoke the curse of Deuteronomy 22, that he is cursed who hangs upon a tree. And they have a title that alleges he is a thief, so along with the others. So the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the faces of its judges. If it is not he, who else could it be? Our judges. Do any of us assume that our judges always render righteous judgment? Even those who have not been corrupted by the system or bought off in some way? Is every judgment rendered innocent of any kind of contamination of self-interest? Then if it is not, to that extent, it becomes a court of oppression. And he knows that God is not like that. But he has to confront facts that would allege that that is the case. Now my days are swifter than a runner. They flee away. They see no good. They pass by like swift ships, like an eagle swooping on its prey. And the eagle swooping on his prey, the bird of prey. He's saying it's coming fast. My demise is coming fast. It's consistent with the metaphor. If I say I will forget my complaint and I will put off my face, and it says here, wear a smile. Actually, it's be cheerful. I am afraid of all my sufferings. I know that you will not hold me innocent. He says, and now he's addressing God. You will not hold me innocent, for I am condemned. Why then do I labor in vain? If I wash myself with snow, and they're translating it snow water, but I think that the idea is if I wash myself with that which purports to be pure, and cleanse my hands with lye, the strongest kind of soap. And in other words, if I am as pure as I can possibly be, yet you will plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes will abhor me. I mean, this is mighty poetry. It's amazing. And this comes to being the center, close to being the center of his reply, which is in chapters 9 and 10, and we need to consider those as a unity, so I'll look at that later. But the center of it, the climax of it, is really what follows. He says, for he is not a man as I am. That is, God is not a man like I am. What he doesn't know is that God will become a man in order to answer these great conundrums of life, in order to reconcile righteousness and truth and justice. God will become a man, which he cannot imagine. He cannot conceive of such a thing. For he is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, and that we should go to court together. Nor is there any mediator. And I think that's an appropriate word. Nor is there anyone to take his hand upon us. Isaiah 1:18 has the same kind of language, using the same verb, one who takes two adversaries, one hand on each, and brings them together. So I think that the mediator is the language that is appropriate there. Nor is there any mediator between us that who may lay his hand upon both of us. Let him take his rod away from me, and do not let dread of him terrify me. Then I would speak and not fear him. But it is not so with me. He is done, in other words. What a beginning to his reply to Bildad. We'll look at the next chapter afterward.
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Warren Gage podcast. If you enjoyed this message, please be sure to like and subscribe to one of our channels so that you never miss an episode. We'd appreciate it if you could also leave us a review. You can find us on drwarrengage.com, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. To support the podcast and gain access to exclusive offers and content from Dr. Warren Gage, please visit our Patreon account at patreon.com/Dr. Warren Gage. We hope you join us next time on the Dr. Warren Gage podcast.